Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. The stories in this video are intense. If you're listening late at night or by yourself, just a warning, this might be one of those videos that has you checking over your shoulder. Thank you all for the support lately and for taking the time to be here. I appreciate every single one of you. And if you've got a story of your own, send it in. You might hear it in a future video. Now settle in and let's get started. I was 26 when this happened. I still had the same truck I bought after college, and I only kept that thing a couple years before the transmission gave up. This was in Colorado, one of the smaller mountain places where people still come for winter, but it feels normal if you live there. I had moved out there with a friend first, then he moved back home after a year, and I stayed because I liked the work and I liked not being in a city anymore. I worked for a lodge that sat 15 minutes from the ski area, depending on road conditions. Fancy enough that rich families stayed there, but not so fancy they replaced things before they broke. So mostly I fixed heaters, hauled salt, unclogged drains, dealt with frozen pipes, changed light fixtures, stuff like that. In winter, every day started early because something was always wrong once temperatures dropped overnight. You'd come in half awake, and somebody at the desk would already be waiting to tell you room 214 had no hot water or the walkway lights were out again. I snowboarded because lift tickets were discounted for locals and employees. I'd usually go on weekdays after work for 2 or 3 hours when the tourists were thinning out. I wasn't some great rider. I could handle black runs if they were groomed, could do small jumps if nobody was watching, and I fell more than I'd admit. This happened near the end of the season. Still a lot of snow on the mountain, but you could feel spring trying to show up in the parking lots. Slush near the base, dirty snowbanks, people wearing hoodies by noon then regretting it later. The higher trails were still solid though, especially the tree sections where sunlight didn't hit much. That day, work had been annoying. One of the boilers kept short cycling, and I spent 2 hours in a cramped room sweating and swearing, while outside it was 20-something degrees. By the time I got off, I almost skipped riding, but I already had my board in the truck, so I drove over. It wasn't crowded. Midweek, wind was light, good visibility. I took 2 frontside runs, first just to loosen up, then rode a chair that served the backside area where there were a few gladed trails through thicker trees. Narrower runs cut through forest with pockets where you could duck into softer snow if you knew the lines. That side of the mountain always felt different. You could hear the lift cables when you were near them, but once you dropped in, it was mostly board scrape, wind in branches, the occasional yell from somebody you never saw. The trees there were tall spruce and pine, trunks dark against all the white. Snow stacked heavy on some branches, and every so often you'd hear a dump of powder hit the ground somewhere off trail. I did 1 lap there, and then another. On the 3rd run, I cut onto a side route that joined back lower down. Less used because it was flatter in parts and people preferred the steeper line. I liked it because it stayed smooth later in the day. There was a bend where the trail narrowed and trees came close on both sides. If someone stood 10 feet off trail, you might not notice right away. I was coming around their moderate speed when I saw something dark ahead on the right side near the edge. I thought somebody had fallen and was trying to strap in. The position looked wrong. It was a man kneeling in the snow just off the packed run, bent forward at the waist, both arms straight down with his bare hands buried wrist deep into the snow. No gloves. He wasn't digging like searching for something. He just had both hands pushed straight into it and was holding them there. I stopped like 15 feet away and sprayed a little snow turning sideways. My first thought honestly was drugs, or a medical thing, or maybe one of those viral stunt idiots. But there was nobody filming and no friends around laughing. He wore ski pants and boots but no jacket, just a thermal shirt, thin gray, no helmet, no hat, hair kind of wet and hanging. He looked to be in his 30s. I called out, "You all right, man?" Nothing. I asked again, "Hey, you need help?" He slowly pulled both hands out of the snow, like he wanted me to watch it happen. He raised them in front of him, and they were red at the wrists, but the fingers looked dark, like blotchy black-purple at the tips and around the nails. I don't know if it was frostbite starting or circulation or what. My stomach dropped. Then he turned his head toward me before the rest of his body did. His face was pale in that way people get when they're freezing or sick. Lips cracked, eyes watery but wide open, not crazy bug-eyed. It's like he hadn't blinked in a while. He said, "I need to confess to Jesus." I was thinking, okay, this is above my pay grade. I'm not religious, but I grew up around enough church people to know confession wasn't usually done half naked in the woods with your hands in snow. I said, "You should get inside. You're going to lose your hands." He ignored that. He turned more toward me and said, "I did something bad." Then he smiled, like when someone remembers a private joke. I was already unstrapping one foot because I thought if he collapsed I might need to walk over there. But every instinct also said keep distance. He asked me, "Do you hear them?" I said, "Nope." That was all I said. "Nope." He looked past me into the trees on the other side of the trail, then back at me. "They followed me here." I glanced behind myself, even though I knew there was nobody. Just trees and the trail curve. I said, "Listen, ski patrol can help you. I can call somebody." No phone service there usually, but I was trying to keep him talking. Then he did something I still can't explain. He laughed once, one short sound, and started peeling his thermal shirt off over his head. Calmly. I said, "Hey man, don't do that." He dropped the shirt in the snow. His chest and shoulders were thin, skin pink from cold except patches that looked almost gray. He had scratches across one side, fresh enough to see red lines. He started fumbling with the buckle on his pants. At that point, I backed my board a little downhill. People always imagine they'd say the perfect thing in situations. I had nothing. I just kept saying, "Stop, man. Stop. You need help." He got the pants loose and shoved them down enough to step out, nearly falling over. Underneath he had thermal bottoms, then yanked those halfway too. Boots still on. It was absurd and terrifying at the same time because none of it made sense. He said, "If I freeze clean, he can hear me." I said, "Who?" He snapped his head at me so fast it made me jump. "Jesus." Then he stood up fully. I thought he was weaker than he was because of how he moved kneeling. But when he stood, he was tall, lean, solid enough, and suddenly alert. He took 2 quick steps toward me, barefoot from the knee down because his layers were tangled around the boots. I shoved backward and nearly caught an edge. He pointed at me and said, "You saw." Those were the words that changed it from weird to dangerous for me. "You saw." I said, "I'm leaving." He started pulling free of the rest of his clothes, jerking at them like they were trapping him. Then he lunged forward. I kicked my loose foot onto the board badly and pushed off downhill. I almost wiped out immediately because one foot was free and the trail narrowed there. Behind me I heard him yell. I risked one look back. He was running after me through the snow beside the trail, mostly naked, stumbling but fast enough to matter. Arms pumping, feet punching through powder, face fixed on me. I've had normal fear plenty of times. Car sliding on ice, almost falling off a ladder, stuff like that. There was no category for a near-naked freezing man sprinting at me through mountain trees. I got both feet centered enough to glide and shot down the trail. A couple riders lower down turned to stare as I came flying past yelling, "Move!" I rode straight to the lift shack at the bottom where 2 employees were standing by the maze ropes. I knew one of them by sight, a guy named Trent. I was talking too fast, trying to explain where exactly the trail split was, what the man looked like, that his hands looked black, that he might be hypothermic or violent or both. They called patrol, asked if maybe it was a friend messing around. I said, "Does that sound like a prank to you?" Patrol came over with one of those rescue sleds and radios clipped everywhere. They sent 2 people up first and then more after that. They said sheriff's office was being notified because if a guest was missing or mentally unstable, they'd need to know. I stayed there because they kept asking follow-up questions. Height, age, exact trail. Did he touch you? Did he threaten you? After like 20 minutes, one patrol guy came back down, face red from cold. He asked me again to point on a map where it happened. I pointed. He said, "You're sure?" I said, "Yes." He looked at the others and said, "We found tracks," then nothing. I thought he meant the snow was hard or wind covered them. He said, "We found clothing too." Then he lowered his voice. "But no man." I said, "What do you mean nothing?" He said tracks went into the trees from where you described. A lot of churned snow. Then it gets messy under cover. We're still looking. They had me write my name and number on a form and then repeat the story again to a deputy with a notepad who kept asking exact wording. Not what was said generally, exact wording. I told him the lines I remembered. I need to confess to Jesus. I did something bad. You saw. When I said that last one, the deputy looked up at me. You're sure? I mean, I'm sure enough. That's what I heard. He wrote it anyway. By then, the lifts were closing for the day. Light was dropping, and it gets dark faster in the trees than people think. Patrol was still out there with radios going off. You feel stupid after adrenaline wears off. Like I overreacted. Maybe the guy was having some kind of breakdown, and I bailed. They asked if I could come by the station the next morning to look at something and clarify a few details. I asked if they found the guy. He said, we found some things. They had printed photos on the table, face down at first. The older guy asked me to retell everything one more time. I did. He interrupted for dumb specifics, like which hand came out of the snow first. I said I don't know, probably right, maybe both together. He seemed annoyed by uncertainty. Then he turned the photos over. They were pictures of clothing laid out on a bench. Gray thermal shirt, ski pants, base layers, socks, one boot. Then another photo of a wallet with cards spread out. Is this what he was wearing? I said it looked like it. Yes, they had identified him. I won't say the name because maybe family is still around. He was from another state. Drove up alone in a rental SUV 2 days earlier. Checked into a motel 30 minutes away, not the resort. No wife or kids from what they said. Mid-30s. Then the older deputy asked, did he mention hurting anyone? I said no. Did he mention a child? No. Did he mention a woman? No. They exchanged a look that I still remember. The older one said, we don't know that he did anything, which usually means they think he did. They let me go after that. I asked again if they found him. They said search teams were continuing in daylight and there were reasons to believe he could still be nearby, disoriented. 2 days later, they found the rental SUV parked at a scenic pullout off a county road. That part got around because tow trucks were visible. Inside were overnight bags, snacks, maps, and a shovel still tagged from a hardware store. Also a blanket with dirt on it. After hearing that, rumors got worse. Nobody found a body. Nobody found a buried anything either, as far as I know. But they searched woods around that pullout for days. Cadaver dogs came. That much I know because I saw them when driving back from town. I started having trouble sleeping then. If he'd been out there long enough for his hands to look like that, how did he still run so hard? Why strip in that kind of cold unless hypothermia was already deep? If he was that far gone, how did he speak so clearly? And what did you saw even mean? Saw what? Him? His hands? My dad had this cabin up in the mountains, northern Maine area. Far enough that once winter settled in, you could go a whole week without seeing another person unless you drove into town yourself. It was one of those places built in stages. Started as a tiny square hunting shack years ago, then somebody added a kitchen, then a back room, then a porch. Nothing matched exactly. Floors dipped in places. Doors swelled when it got wet. You had to shoulder the bathroom door in January because the frame shifted every year. My dad loved it there. He said silence was different in the mountains than anywhere else. I used to think that was corny, but he was right. Snow kind of eats sound. Even when wind is moving, everything feels padded down. You hear your own boots more than anything. He'd gotten older and stopped going up much, so I went that winter to check pipes, clear snow, run the generator some, make sure mice hadn't taken over. I was 32 then and had a few days between jobs. It was easier for me than paying somebody local. I also wanted the break. The road in was half plowed and ugly. I had chains in the truck and still slid twice. Cabin was cold enough inside that my breath showed. I got the wood stove going, banged ice off the steps, checked under sinks, checked the crawlspace hatch. Second day, I drove into a small town like 25 minutes away, bought groceries, propane, coffee, and one of those cheap extension cords because the old one there had split. Spoke to a guy at the hardware counter who knew my dad. That happens in places like that. You don't know them, but they know your family somehow. Came back, shoveled some more, split wood, listened to a game on the radio. Nothing strange. The rats happened the third morning. I opened the front door and almost stepped on one. Then I looked up and there were more. 7, maybe 8, could have been 9. They were scattered across the porch boards and near the steps like somebody tossed them there from a bucket. Big rats too, not field mice. Thick bodies, long tails stiff in the cold. My first thought was poison. Maybe they got into something somewhere and crawled there. But why all on the porch? Why not under the cabin, woodshed, anywhere else? Also, I hadn't seen signs of rats inside. Mice, sure, old place always had some, but not that many rats. Then I thought an owl or fox dragged them there. But again, lined across the porch weirdly. Not piled, not half-eaten. I used a snow shovel and pushed them into a contractor bag. They were stiff as sticks already. I remember the sound more than anything, like frozen fruit hitting plastic. I carried the bag out past the tree line and left it near the trash barrels because I didn't want that smell near the porch. After that, the whole morning felt off. There weren't even fresh tire tracks besides mine. Snow would have shown everything. I called my dad mostly to ask if locals messed with each other up there. He said not really, and anyway not in winter. Then he told me to look for weasel tracks because they unalive small animals for fun sometimes. He says stuff like that very matter of fact. I looked later and didn't see anything that made sense. I should mention the layout. Front porch faced the narrow driveway. Kitchen entered right from that door. To the left was living room with 2 windows looking out front. Hallway behind that led to bathroom and the bedroom I used. On the right side of the cabin was a side wall with no porch, just packed snow, then trees starting about 15 feet out. Window there looked into the living room. Roof was low enough a tall guy could reach the edge if snow banked up. The next couple days I kept busy. Fixed one loose cabinet hinge, recaulked around a sink line, cut wood, walked a little trail behind the cabin. I told myself the rats were just mountain weirdness. Places have their own weirdness. Farms have weird things. Cities have weird things. Woods have weird things. 2 mornings later, I went around the right side of the cabin to check where drifting snow had piled against the siding. I saw a carcass. It was laid near the wall carefully, legs tucked strange, fur torn open at the belly. Not a lot of blood in the snow, which was what bothered me. Where was the mess? If something dragged it there, why leave it touching the cabin like that? Its head was turned toward the wall. I backed up, then came closer again with a shovel handle. It looked fresh enough that steam should have been coming off it in that cold, but there was nothing. I remember the smell being light, metallic, not rotten yet. I said out loud, "What the hell?" to nobody. I decided I'd drag it farther off once I got gloves. I went inside through the front, grabbed thicker gloves and an old tarp from the mudroom bench. While I was in there 30 seconds total, I heard footsteps. Inside. From the living room area. Slow, on old floorboards. Anybody who's been in an old cabin knows the sound difference. Snow outside is muffled. Wood floor has a crack and weight to it. This was inside the house. I dropped the tarp and went straight through the kitchen fast enough to slam my hip on the counter. Nobody there. Living room empty, hall empty, bedroom empty, bathroom empty, nothing. Front door still shut, windows latched, no footprints under the windows, no sound after those steps. There's a kind of fear that comes after confusion. I wasn't scared during the search because I was busy. I got scared after standing in the middle of the room with gloves on, realizing I had definitely heard somebody walk across that floor. I didn't touch the carcass after that. I left it there and told myself I'd deal with it later. Instead, I kept the shotgun nearby the rest of the day. My dad kept one there for coyotes and general mountain peace of mind. I'm not some gun guy, but I knew how to use it. Sunset came early and hard. Trees went black, windows turned mirror dark. Around 10, I decided I was overreacting. That's honest. Animals move under siding, imagination fills blanks. Happens. I locked up, checked the front door, then went into the bedroom. Bedroom had one window facing the side yard, same side where that dead animal was. I pulled the curtain mostly closed, but not all the way because I hate waking up in a sealed dark room. I was in bed like 20 minutes and something hit the roof. Multiple feet, fast, crossing from one end to the other, like several people sprinting over the cabin at once. Heavy enough snow shook loose from the eaves. I sat straight up and didn't move. Then I looked toward the gap in the curtain. There was a face outside the window. Pale blue or blue-gray from moonlight, I don't know. Human-shaped. I could see dark lips, almost black-looking against the skin. Eyes open wide and fixed on me. No hat, no fog from breath on the glass. Just that face staring. I froze so hard my back cramped. It didn't blink. Then it smiled. I moved before I even knew I was moving. I rolled out of bed, hit the floor wrong, smashed my knee on the nightstand, grabbed the shotgun from where it was leaning by the dresser. By the time I got it in my hands and looked back, the face was gone. Window was just black glass again, with my room reflecting back at me. I backed to the bedroom door and locked it. And called my friend Aaron, who lived lower down the mountain about 40 minutes if roads were decent, longer in snow. I said, "Get up here right now." He started asking what happened, and I kept talking over him. I told him somebody was outside the cabin, maybe more than one person, maybe on the roof, I didn't know. I was not making sense. I sat on the floor beside the bed with the gun across my lap like I was in a movie I didn't want to be in. The worst part was not knowing if any of it was real, because once you get scared, every sound gets promoted. I kept staring at the bottom of the door. At one point, I heard a noise on the roof again, then a slide. Aaron stayed on speaker while driving. I could hear chains rattling sometimes, tires spinning, him cursing. He kept telling me to talk. I think he knew silence would make it worse. So I said things. I described the face. I described the dead rats. Then the carcass. He said, "Why didn't you call me earlier?" Good question. It took him about 50 minutes, felt like 4 hours. When his truck finally came into the driveway, I saw headlights through the curtain and almost cried from relief, which is embarrassing but true. He laid on the horn twice so I'd know it was him. I didn't leave the room immediately. That's another thing people imagine wrong. Relief doesn't switch fear off. I waited till he was pounding on the front door, yelling my name. Then I unlocked the bedroom and moved through the hall with the gun pointed everywhere. Aaron was inside by the kitchen, snow all over his boots and shoulders, holding a flashlight and a revolver he carried sometimes. He took one look at me and said, "Jesus." We checked the whole cabin together. Nothing inside. The bedroom window outside had no prints directly under it either, but snow around that side was crusted and windblown in patches, hard to read. We both stood there shining lights. Then Aaron's beam landed on the carcass by the wall. Except it wasn't there. The snow where it had been was disturbed, dragged, but the animal itself was gone. I know what I saw earlier that day. I was 3 feet from it. It existed. Now there was just a dark stain and marks leading a little way toward the trees before the blowing snow swallowed them. Aaron asked if I moved it and was messing with him. I said no. He believed me pretty quick because I was beyond joking. We did one more slow circle around the cabin, lights into the woods, both of us listening. There are times trees sound like whispering when wind goes through frozen needles. That whole night had that kind of sound. We never saw anybody. I locked the cabin up, grabbed a bag, and left with him. Next morning we went back after sunrise. Daylight helps almost everything. Makes bad thoughts look stupid. I expected to feel that way. Instead, it was worse because daylight showed details. There were tracks now that we could follow better from fresh angle. It's like partial impressions where something had moved in and out of drifted snow. Some looked almost barefoot but too long. The next mark looked like a heel from a boot. On the roof edge over the bedroom window, snow had been crushed down in a line. Aaron climbed a ladder from the shed and looked over the roof. He came down fast and said there were marks crossing it, several paths like people or animals had run over and slid, but no clear pattern. Inside the cabin, living room floor had 3 damp spots near the rug that hadn't been there before, circles where snow melted. Could have tracked from us during the panic. Could have been old. Once something gets in your head, every stain becomes evidence. We found one thing that was definitely new. On the kitchen counter near the sink was one dead rat. Just one. Same kind as the porch ones. I know for a fact it had not been there when Aaron came in because he leaned on that counter while talking to me. He said, "We're done here." We called the local sheriff. Could be animals doing animal things and nerves doing the rest. He wrote a report because we insisted. My dad was angry I'd left the stove and angrier that I wanted him to sell the place. He went up there himself 2 weeks later with my uncle. They stayed one night, found nothing strange, and came home talking like I'd spooked myself in the woods. That bothered me more than if they'd believed me. Makes you question your own memory. But there were things I know happened. The rats on the porch happened. Aaron saw the one on the counter. The carcass was there, then gone. The footsteps inside while I was outside happened, and I saw someone looking through that window. Maybe more than one person. Maybe they'd been using the place when nobody was there and didn't like me showing up. That explanation makes the most sense, except for the roof running and how quiet they moved and how there were never clear tracks when there should have been. I never stayed there again. Dad kept it another 3 years, then sold it. I'm Amber. This happened a few winters ago when I was still living in northern Maine for work. I only say northern because people always ask what town, and I'd rather not say exactly. If you blink driving through, you miss the whole thing. Woods in every direction. I had moved there because a rehab clinic hired me for office work, and the pay was better than what I was making before. I rented half of an old duplex. The walls were thin enough I knew when my neighbor sneezed. In winter, the pipes knocked all night, and the windows got frost on the inside if it was cold enough. I didn't hate it, though. My friend Kelsey lived about 30 minutes away in another small town. We worked together, ended up taking lunch at the same time a lot, then started hanging out. She was louder than me, kind of blunt, funny in a mean way sometimes, but loyal. She drove an old Subaru. I drove a little Honda that did not belong in heavy snow, but somehow kept surviving. That winter had been rough already. Snow every few days, roads always packed down with that gray crunchy layer under fresh powder. You'd get used to driving tense without noticing it. Shoulders up by your ears, hands clamped on the wheel. The kind of winter where everybody keeps boots by the door and a shovel in the trunk, because getting stuck isn't a maybe. The night this happened, Kelsey and I had gone to a birthday dinner for one of the nurses from work. We ate at a bar and grill attached to a motel near the highway. Fried food, too much ranch dressing, everyone saying they should do this more often and never doing it. We stayed later than I meant to because snow started coming down again and nobody wanted to be first one out on the roads. By the time we left, it was around 10:30, closer to 11. Not late for some people, late for there. Once businesses close, those towns go dark fast. Kelsey had 2 drinks over several hours, so I told her I'd drive us back and she could get her car in the morning from my place. We'd done similar things before. Instead of taking the main road, I cut through a forest route that shaved like 20 minutes off the drive. During the day, it was pretty. At night, it was just black trees and reflectors. I knew the road, but not in a relaxed way. It twisted a lot, narrow shoulders, no houses for stretches. If something happened out there, you waited a while for help. Snow was still falling, big flakes drifting more than blowing. My headlights made it look thicker than it was. The wipers kept up that scraping rhythm, and the heater was too hot on my feet, but nowhere else. Kelsey was half scrolling on her phone, half talking about some guy she'd started seeing. I remember only pieces because after a point the whole night split in my head. We came around a bend and I saw something dark in the road ahead. I braked hard enough, the anti-lock kicked in. Kelsey grabbed the dash and yelled at me. I thought it was a deer because they get hit there all the time. I stopped like 30 feet away. It was a person lying in the snow. Sideways, one arm bent under them, one leg stretched out. Dark clothes with snow collecting on top. Kelsey sat up straight. "Oh my God," I said, "call 911. She already had her phone out, but there was no service. That wasn't unusual there. You'd lose signal for miles in spots. She held it to the windshield. One bar came and went. I didn't want to get out. I know how that sounds. Someone could be dying and my first thought was I do not want to open this door. But it was dark, middle of nowhere, and something about it looked wrong. Not injured wrong, staged wrong. Like when furniture is almost in the right place but not quite. Kelsey said, "Maybe he got hit." I said, "By who?" "There's nobody here." We argued in that whisper yell people do when they're scared. She wanted me to pull closer so we could see if the person was moving. I wanted to reverse and turn around, but that road was narrow and the ditches were deep. So I rolled forward slowly. My headlights reached him fully then. It was a man, 30s or 40s, hair matted wet against his head. No coat that I could see, just a sweatshirt open at the neck and dark pants. Snow all over his back and shoulders. Bare feet, it made no sense. Bare feet on packed snow in that temperature. There were marks on his arms, scrapes, something darker along one side of his shirt. He was face down enough I couldn't tell if he was breathing. Kelsey cracked her window an inch and yelled, "Sir, can you hear us?" Nothing. Then she yelled louder. The man stood up so fast I screamed. He snapped upward like a spring. 1 second in the road, next second crouched and facing us. Snow slid off him. His eyes caught the headlights in that weird bright way. He opened his mouth and made a sound I still hate thinking about. It was like a hiss, but deeper. Then he ran at the car. I threw it into reverse by instinct, but my foot slipped. He hit the hood with both hands and slammed onto it chest first, then clawed up toward the windshield. Kelsey was shrieking beside me. I don't mean cute movie screaming, full panic screaming where no words come out. The man's face was inches away through the glass. His nose was bleeding or already had been. One cheek looked torn up from something old or fresh. I couldn't tell. Snow stuck in his beard. His teeth were chattering, but he was grinning too. That part messed with me the most, seeing someone clearly freezing and smiling anyway. I yelled, "Get off!" He cocked his head like he was listening. I started to gun it forward, but Kelsey grabbed the wheel and screamed, "No! You'll kill him! Stop!" And she was right in some stupid practical sense, because he was covering most of the windshield. I could barely see the road edges. If I swerved into trees or flipped us, then what? So we sat there for like 5 seconds. He began banging his forehead against the windshield. Once, twice, the glass boomed. A spider line didn't form, thank God, but the whole car shook. Then he dragged one hand down the glass, leaving a smear. Kelsey was crying now and trying 911 over and over. I was laying on the horn. It sounded useless out there, swallowed by snow and trees. He hissed again, like, not words, that same horrible sound. Then he reached for the wiper blades and bent one backward. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. He slid sideways across the hood, grabbed at the mirror, lost hold, and rolled off into the snowbank. I drove straight ahead, fishtailing, tires catching, then losing, then catching again. Kelsey twisted around in her seat, yelling, "He's up! He's up!" He was running after the car, barefoot in the road, arms pumping weirdly stiff. Then he veered and disappeared in the dark at the side. I thought that was it. I really did. Then something grabbed the rear passenger handle from outside and jerked it. Kelsey screamed so loud my ears rang. He had somehow cut through the side and reached us again, trying the door as we were still moving slow from sliding. The handle yanked twice more. Luckily, doors were locked. I hit the gas harder, and the Honda finally found traction. We shot forward, engine whining, both of us sobbing and yelling nonsense. We got service again near the highway and called 911. They looked at the hood, the windshield, the prints in the slush on the side of the car where he'd grabbed it. They went out to search that road. They asked us again to describe the man, especially the no shoes part. Then asked if we noticed any other vehicles nearby. We said no. They found blood in the snow where he'd been lying, and footprints, bare footprints, and they led straight into the woods. There were units checking logging trails and nearby roads. They took our statements separately. I guess they wanted to see if our stories matched. They asked if we knew anyone who would do a prank like that. No. If we had enemies. No. If maybe we'd almost hit a hitchhiker who panicked. No. Because hitchhikers don't leap onto hoods hissing like animals and smashing their faces into glass. Kelsey came with me because neither of us wanted to be by ourselves after that. By noon, everyone there knew something had happened, because small towns run on gossip better than electricity. People kept texting asking if we were okay, then asking what drugs he was on, then telling us some version of a story they'd heard about a man escaped from rehab, escaped from jail, escaped from psych, escaped from somewhere. Nobody knew anything. It didn't sit right because there was no explanation. If police had found him, they didn't tell us. If he'd been injured, where'd he go barefoot in deep snow? If he'd been on something, where was he getting to out there with no vehicle around? Another car had called in something on the same road earlier that evening. They reported a man walking barefoot near the shoulder, bleeding and refusing help. Supposedly, when a plow driver stopped, the guy ran into the trees. None of that explained the way he moved. I'm not saying supernatural nonsense. I don't believe that. I mean the energy of someone beyond pain, beyond normal reactions, running barefoot on ice and slamming his skull into safety glass like it was nothing. Kelsey handled it differently. She got angry. She'd tell the story at bars, get louder every retelling, call him Snow Zombie or Catman. I knew that was how she coped. A month passed. Winter started easing. Roads turned to brown slush and exposed gravel. That area floods in spots when snow melts, and hunters, utility crews, random people end up finding stuff the snow hid. One Saturday, the local Facebook page blew up because remains had been found off an old logging spur not far from that road. Human remains, partial. Everyone assumed it was our guy. Weeks later, they announced it was not. Older case, missing man from years before, identified through dental records. Sad story, unrelated. Which meant the man on our hood was still just out there in the world somewhere, if he lived.